You broke this to me in a way where I thought the Rangers had traded for either Patty Kane or Timo Meyer. And when you said Bo Horvat, I was just like, oh, it happened. And a split
Hmm.
second later, you said to the Islanders, and I was just like, you're lying. Of
Yeah.
course. Of course, it was to the New York Islanders. But yes, Bo Horvat has been traded to the New York Islanders for Anthony Beauvillier, Aatu Raty, and a 2023 first round pick, which has a condition on it of it's basically a top 12 protected pick in 2023. Do I see it being top 12? No. But this is a very good return for Vancouver, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I see a lot of different people, kind of going on two different sides of the trade. Some people like it for the Islanders, some people like it for the Canucks. And I'll tell you, Shades, at first glance, I really liked it for Vancouver. They bring back a young, albeit inconsistent top six forward. I guess you can consider a third line forward right now in Anthony Beauvillier. He still has some upside, and that's what you're looking for if you're Vancouver. You're looking for controllable players who can turn around their careers maybe in a different location. And I think Anthony Beauvillier fits that billing really well. And as far as Aatu Ratu, look, he was a second round pick. He was projected to go in the top 10 in his
He
draft year.
he was at
And
one point a projected first overall pick.
and his stock fell big time. And the Islanders, they took a risk selecting him in the second round. They only had one pick. They did not have a first round pick. They had one second round pick, and they go with a guy, who scouts were kind of not really high on at the time of the draft. And look, he had 2 goals in 9 games. Is that really coming, showing yourself and being like, whoa, I'm a superstar player? No, not really, but, showed some upside. And for a player coming straight out of Finland, into the NHL, I think he acclimated himself quite well. And that first round pick, Shades, I cannot stress this enough. It's a top 12 protected pick. Okay, so if the Islanders are bad enough to where they are picking in the top 12 in this year's draft, then it's an unprotected first round pick in 2024. And who's to say that the Islanders might not be an even worse team next year than they are this year, and that pick is unprotected? And if it ends up being in the top 10 or the top 5, Vancouver just got a lot better. So the risk for me, that makes the trade a little bit better from the Canucks standpoint. And from the Islanders, again, I just don't understand it positionally, right? They have 5 centermen now. If you consider Anders Lee a centerman, they have 6 players that play center. You can say what you want. Okay, Barzell is going to move to Bo Horvat's wing. That's fair, but I just don't know. You got Nelson, true blue center, Pajot, very good two-way center. Barzell, you just signed for 8 years, $9.5 million to be your number one center. Are you paying 8 years, $9.5 million to Matt Barzell to be a top line winger? I'm not really sure you are based on his production. So a lot of question marks, Shades. I could go on for days. I don't like the move. I don't hate that the Islanders went all in. I hate that they went in all in on a player that they didn't need positionally. Go for a winger. Go for a Bo Horvat. Give up less, prospect wise, and then maybe you'll be better off in the long term. But Lou Lamoriello, just question mark Shades. Sorry, the long answer, but had to get it off my chest.
I'm glad you ended it with that because that's exactly what I was going to transition to into with Lou Lamoriello and trading for a guy in Bo Horvat who plays a position in which, frankly, like you said, they didn't need. They needed more of a winger. But can they move Barzell? Sure, absolutely. But I mean, you have a guy who you drafted as a center, paid to be a center, and now all of a sudden you're going to move him back to the wing again. It's questionable, very questionable. And if you look at Lou Lamoriello's track record of the salary cap era, it's not really that good if you think about it, because just off the top of my head, the Devils in 2011-12 made the Stanley Cup final. That was when they had Kovalchuk and Parise and just honestly a very, very good team. And then that team immediately fell off because a bunch of players left. Lamoriello really wasn't able to get the Devils back on track after that. He goes to the Maple Leafs, a team that, frankly, hasn't been able to get out of the first round, even though he did draft some key guys for them, aka, Marner. And I think he was drafted. I think he drafted Matthews. I think he was still the GM at that point. I could be very wrong on that, but he drafted guys. I'm pretty sure he drafted Marner and Nylander. But that's basically been Kyle Dubas's team for a while now. Haven't been able to get out of the first round. Now he's on to the Islanders, who I will give the Islanders credit. They made back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals in 2020 and 2021 in the playoffs. And you can say what you want about Lou Lamoriello, but the fact of the matter is he didn't build either one of those teams. The infrastructure was there player-wise. He just hired the coach.
And then he
So
fired the coach.
well, yeah, he fired the first guy to bring in Barry Trotz, and now Barry Trotz is gone and the team fell off. So just my opinion. And I think a decent chunk of people would agree. He's been a very overrated GM in the salary cap era because as soon as a team of his falls off, he has shown that he has not been able to get things back on track.
I totally agree with you. And the one positive that you mentioned, Shades, was the fact that he has a pretty good draft record, right? With the Maple Leafs getting Marner, Nylander, he hit on a couple of first rounders. Guess what? The Islanders haven't had a first round pick 4 straight years after this year, if that pick is not in the top 12. So if he's not drafting, what positives is he bringing to the table? Because clearly he's got an outdated mindset, in terms of what this team really needs. He signs Kyle Palmieri to a long-term contract. Is that something the Islanders needed? Absolutely not. And there were a couple marginal moves there that kind of have you scratching your head. Romanov, I like Romanov, but again, was that an acquisition that you really need to make? Horvat, like we just said, positionally, was that necessary? It really wasn't. So I just don't think he's in the right state of mind. I just think he's just old and he's just has poor decision making. And I think that started at the end of his tenure with the Devils, continued when he was with the Maple Leafs, and is finally finishing up in his time with the Islanders. And I think they're going to move on from him in the offseason when they have the chance. I think, and look, credit to Lou Lamoriello, right? General managers have 2 bullets. One of them is a big trade, and the other one is firing a coach before they get fired themselves. And Lou Lamoriello already fired the coach, hired a new one, and it's backfired. So this was his big trade. And if it doesn't work out, I cannot foresee any scenario in which the front office of the Islanders and the ownership group is okay with bringing him back another season to operate things in the front office. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's just how I see it.
Well, I'm glad you said outdated mindset because a lot of Islanders fans, including like close friends of mine, they agree that they're not huge on Lamoriello either, because even they see the puzzling moves that he's made over his tenure with the Islanders. And I did not know that they haven't had a first round pick the last 3 years.
That's right. And let's call a spade a spade. They were only as good as they were during the 2020 and 2021 season because of Barry Trotz and the system that they implemented. Look, it was bubble hockey. You want to say that it's a fake championship. I'm not going to agree with that. But what I will say is that it's a different style that you have to play. It's really hard forechecking hockey, and the Islanders played that better than anybody else during that run. And in 2021, the same thing. And once they fired Trotz and once they went towards a little bit more of an offensive game, it was over from there. It's not a discredit to Lane Lambert. It's a credit to Barry Trotz and how, like I've said many times, Shades, the best coach in the NHL is sitting on the sidelines at home in Winnipeg, right? He's from Winnipeg?
Think so. Yeah, I think so. Now, just to transition back to Bo Horvat for a second, the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello did in fact trade for this guy, as somebody in my fantasy league picks up Ivan Barbashev, better by Barbashev. So he trades for Bo Horvat, whose career high in points is 61, which came during the 2018-2019 season, where he had 27 goals and 34 assists in a full 82 game season. Then obviously, COVID hit the next 2 years, where he had 53 points in 69 games. Nice. And 39 points in 56 games. And last year, in 70 games, he had 52 points, posting his first 30-goal season, where he finished with 31 goals and 21 assists. And that stat sheet is almost replicated up to this point this year. He has 31 goals again so far this year, with 23 assists for 54 points in 49 games this year. So if you go based on his career average up to this point, he's not a point per game player. And my whole question is this who Bo Horvat is now, or is this just a somewhat flash in the pan because he knew his contract was coming up? That's going to be the real question moving forward, because you can look at a bunch of guys who have had big years in contract years, and then they never really replicated that same success. Before I throw it back to you, I just want to, not that I'm comparing the two players in any way based on how they play or the situation that they're in, but I look at a guy like Patrick Kane, who they got an absolute mega deal, $10.5 million a year. And early in his career, he wasn't a bad point per game type player, where the point per game rate wasn't bad, but it wasn't necessarily great. And then he had that one great year where people said, "Oh, he might not stay at this level," and then he did. So, what are your thoughts on Bo Horvat as a player?
I don't think you can compare Bo Horvat and Patrick Kane in regard to your comparison. I just don't think they're similar enough players. I don't think that you can foresee a jump from 50 points he might get 75, 80 points at the end of this season. He's got 54 points in 49 games. I'm not trying to discount him at all, but to say that he's going to be like Patrick Kane, put up an 80-point season this year and then continue to do that years on end, I just don't see that. I just don't think he's that type of player. I think a better comparison is Nazem Kadri, who was just an unrestricted free agent at the end of last year. A leader kind of guy, plays with grit, again, just a really team-oriented guy. He got paid, $7.5 million by the Flames. He just had his career year where he put up 75, 80 points with the Avalanche, won the Stanley Cup. But before that, he was putting up Bo Horvat type numbers, 45 plus points a season. So I think that's the better comparison for me. And for the Islanders, I think they're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. And what I mean by that is re-signing Bo Horvat. Because if you re-sign Bo Horvat, what's the entire reason Horvat was traded by Vancouver in the first place? Because they committed to JT Miller before signing him in the offseason. And they're like, well, we have two number one centers, and we're not going to pay two number one centers $7.5 to $9 million a season. So they committed to Miller and traded Bo Horvat. Like I just said, the Islanders just signed Barzal by $9.5 million. So now they had the same problem that Canucks wanted to avoid. So now they have $18 million almost if they sign Bo Horvat to about $7.5 million to $8 million locked up in two players. And that's not even counting the $7.5 million that Anders Lee makes, the $5.5 million that Josh Bailey makes, the $5.5 million that Kyle Palmieri makes, the $6 million that Semyon Varlamov makes. Tons of dead cap on this team. And I think Bo Horvat, at least not initially, in the latter years of his contract, if he signs with the Islanders, could be like Bailey is now, like Palmieri is now, like Anders Lee is becoming, even though he's the captain of the team. So risky for this Islanders team. Very.
Yeah, the only reason I brought up Patrick Kane is because he was a player whose career had a similar type of career in like regards to, at least up to this point, where he wasn't a bad point producer, but he wasn't necessarily in like a top five, kind of like he became. The only reason I brought that up is because he's just a guy that came to mind where he wasn't like too much of a point producer. Then he had that 1 year and then kind of stayed at that level after he made that significant jump. I probably should have brought up a guy like Brad Marchand because he had a similar type of career where he wasn't a huge point getter, then had that one big year, and then he stayed at that level after he rose to that level.
Marchand, I think, is a much better comparison for
Yeah,
you.
I
I
should
think
have
Patrick is a very good one,
yeah,
but I just think he was a
I should have made that
okay.
Should have clarified that a little more.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with you. And he was a number one overall pick. And look, going back to what you said about him getting paid $10.5 million on his first long-term contract extension, I think as much of it had to do with the points he was producing. Also, by that point, he had won two Stanley Cups by that point,
I think it
three
was
Stanley
three.
Cups by that point. So, that goes into it as well. And that's something that Bo Horvat just doesn't have. Very good leader. He's a captain, but it's not like he's been a part of Stanley Cup winning teams. And when general managers look at acquiring players and subsequently extending them, it's a big factor because general managers want to win.
Yeah, but
And
you
as crazy
definitely,
as Lou isn't over the hill as he might be, he still wants to win. At least I
yeah,
hope, if I'm an Islanders fan. My goodness. I'm
yeah.
sorry
If
you were
you're an
saying.
Islanders fan, you got to hope that this move works out because it has a this move has very boom bust potential, in my opinion.
Agreed. And I do want to put this out there, Shades, and I want to, it's a crazy idea. It may sound crazy right now on the night that the Islanders acquire Bo Horvat.
Hit
But
me.
I think if Lou Lamoriello by the trade deadline sees that his team is not within striking distance of the playoffs, what if they trade Bo Horvat? What if they flip him themselves? Now, I'm not sure if they'd get, as much as Aatu Ratu, Anthony Beauvillier in a first round pick, but if he puts up, let's just say 20 points in his first 12 games with the Islanders, drives the price up. The Islanders are out of the playoffs, and Lou Lamoriello can try to recoup some assets. So just don't take that out of the question. As crazy as it sounds.
Because you brought that up, I'm going to bring up all the teams in the hunt for wild card spots, including the two teams that are currently holding the wild card spots. The Washington Capitals have 58 points in 52 games. Pittsburgh Penguins have 57 points in 49 games. The Buffalo Sabres have 56 points in 49 games, which good for them. I'm happy they're finally starting to rise from, basically irrelevancy. The New York Islanders currently have 55 points in 52 games. So they are 3 points behind the Capitals with the same amount of games played. But the two teams ahead of them in the Penguins and Sabres both have 3 points, 3 games in hand with a points lead. And the Florida Panthers have 54 points in 52 games. And I have to mention this just because the Philadelphia Flyers have 51 points in 51 games, crawling literally out of basically a 10-foot hole that they were in earlier in the season. So this has become a very, very intriguing Eastern Conference wildcard race. I just had to put that out there because you brought that up.
No, I'm with you. And that makes it even tougher for the Islanders to get back into things. When they don't have those games in hand, like teams like you mentioned that the Penguins do, and others. And look, the Flyers, I'll give them their credit. They have been playing John Tortorella branded hockey. He has that team committed to defense, and Carter Hart for the first time in his career is playing in front of a defense that's actually good enough, to actually help him along and make sure that he's not left out to dry the entire 60 minutes, and he's having a much better season. Good for Philadelphia. I hope they don't make the playoffs, but I hope that they don't get Connor Bedard either. So, kind of in that middle thing. But as far as the Eastern Conference playoff race, look, the Penguins are falling off big time. The Capitals, same thing. I'm not sold on either of them. The Islanders, I think, have an opportunity to jump over those two teams. But like you said, the Panthers, they won the President's Trophy last year. And you know what? It's taking a little bit of time to get that chemistry. Matthew Tkachuk, a new top line forward with the team. It's going to take a while. And the Buffalo Sabres, Shades, you said it. You're happy for them. I mean, look, they have Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power on the back end. They got good goaltending and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and also a 42-year-old Craig Anderson who's kind of rejuvenated his career. And Tage Thompson just might be my favorite player in the NHL. So, and Don Granato is a good coach too. So,
Oh, absolutely.
they got a good thing going on over there.
Yeah, and man, we've hit on a lot of different aspects in this trade, but let's all circle back to what Vancouver gets in this trade. Did they win it at the time of this trade? Did they get good value? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think they got good value. I don't think it was a fleece, but I think that they won this trade. I think they got a first round pick. They got a young player with upside, and they got a prospect that was once highly touted and was looked at as a potential number one overall pick and looked pretty good in 9 NHL games. So if I'm a Vancouver fan, I wouldn't be upset. Look deeper than the numbers. That's what I would suggest. And it's a player they weren't going to bring back anyway. Now, would the right decision have been not to sign JT Miller, trade him after his 99-point season, get better assets than you got in this deal and extend Horvat as your captain? Yeah, that probably would have been better, but hindsight is 2020. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and just to talk on the Vancouver side of this. They got good value for a player that they made it very clear that they weren't going to sign because of a stupid decision made beforehand in the JT Miller contract. And they get a young Aatu Raty who is currently 20 years old, a guy who basically had top 5 draft potential at one point and is honestly, he's not looking like a total bust at the moment. Getting him in the second round like they did, he can develop into a nice piece for them. And if he does, this trade is going to look even worse for the Islanders. Anthony Beauvillier is currently 25, and he has a career high of 39 points. Like you said earlier, he's struggled a little bit because of the inconsistencies. But to get basically a middle six winger who can put up around 15 goals a season, that's not bad. Especially with
It's not bad.
especially with the situation that the Vancouver Canucks are currently in. And now we're kind of how we were questioning Jim Rutherford's comments in the press conference last week or 2 episodes ago?
I do.
This kind of trade actually, it makes him look not like a total idiot, which I didn't think was possible.
Yeah. He said he wanted young players back with upside, and he got 2. And he got a first round pick in a draft that is pretty loaded. And you know what? There's also, like I said, there's that risk that this pick is in the top 12 and it becomes unprotected in 2024. But there's also the chance that the Islanders get the 14th pick, the 13th pick. And if they do, this draft class is loaded. So it could turn into a really nice, package of prospect for a player that you weren't going to bring back anyway. I know it stings if you're the Canucks fans right now because they traded away their captain, but as far as the players that they got in the future that they have, along with extending on Andrei Kuzmenko that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show probably, the future looks a lot brighter than it looked 2 weeks ago. And like you said, Jim Rutherford looks a little less idiotic than he did initially, but still idiotic nonetheless.
Yeah, I just keep referring back to his tenure in Pittsburgh, and that speaks for itself. So yeah, basically Horvat gets traded to the Islanders for a pretty nice package. We talked about Lamoriello, the coaching decisions, yada, yada, yada. We covered basically every single aspect of this trade that we could possibly cover. And, well, we're both Ranger fans, so I hope this doesn't work out for the Islanders.
I don't think it will. I don't think it will, Shades, to be honest with you. Again, damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they re-sign them, they're going to be in a salary cap crunch to where they're not going to be able to add, another superstar player. Because again, remember last offseason, the last 2 off seasons, actually, 3 if you count the Artemi Panarin one, they were trying to go for the star player and they missed out. They missed out on Panarin, they missed out on Landeskog, and they missed out on Gaudreau last year. And now they bring in Horvat, and suddenly if you extend him by 8 by 8.5, that's your big fish. And if another one comes along in the UFA pool, Lou Lamoriello or whoever the general manager is going to be at that time is not going to have enough money to bring them in and significantly change the roster. So if it works, great. But if it doesn't, and they are stuck with Bo Horvat at the term that they might be if they have to extend them, oh my goodness, this could be a rough next couple of years for this Islanders team, coming off of 2 out of the last 3 years where they were really successful.
Yeah, no, definitely gonna keep a very close eye on how this trade develops, and gonna be fascinating. So,
but
go ahead.
Can I say one more thing about this trade, just real quick?
Yeah,
I don't want to discount the Islanders either. They got a really good player in Bo Horvat here, a really good leader, somebody who's going to come into the locker room and is going to significantly change the trajectory of this lineup. They look a little bit flat. They look a little bit old and slow at times. I think Bo Horvat is going to change that. I think on a team that had a lot of dark spots on the Vancouver Canucks, he was one of the shining lights. And I think that's going to translate well to the Islanders. Remember, they're bringing in a captain. They're bringing in a character guy, and they're bringing in a player who's on a career season. So I just, I don't want this discussion to end without it being known that the Islanders, albeit how it looks from a long-term and short-term perspective, they did get the best player in this trade right now, and we should mention that.
That's definitely a fair and good, very good point. They did get the best player involved in the trade. Now, Aatu Raty, if he develops and becomes a player similar to Horvat, whoo, gonna
And
be very bad.
this Finnish elite league that these players are coming out of, your Capo Caco, your Aatu Ratu, your Yesu Puijarvi, they produce pretty good two-way players. They might not be those offensive standout flashy forwards that get out of North America and Canada and Sweden, but really good on the defensive side of the puck. And that's one of the shining spots of Ratu's game. So, again, just a player that helps in all three zones.
Yeah. And one last thing. If the draft pick is this year, Vancouver's putting themselves in a very good position to get some good young players.
Then they could very well get the best player in the trade.
Yep.
That first round pick is the wild card for sure.
Yeah. All draft picks are wild cards. And yeah.